Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odessa, and we are starting for today with the briefing dedicated to how the war affects the water resources of Ukraine. We are having with us Anna Danylyak, expert in the development of sustainable agricultural NGO Ekodiya. Anna, I'd like to welcome you first. The floor is yours. I'm representing NGO Ekodiya or Ecoaction, and we study the impact of the Russia's war aggression against Ukraine. And now, I'd like to ask to show this slide with a map. On this map, you can see the cases of the potential harmful impact of the Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Any military action cannot but impact the environment, including live creatures, grounds, and waters. All these environmental components interact with each other, and this means if there is an impact on the one component, it will be sooner or later transformed into the harmful impact on the other element. Water is one of the most mobile components, and this means that chemical and physical contamination can be transported to a long distance from the initial source or epicenter. On the next slide, you can see the regions which have been mostly affected by the war in Ukraine. I can also say that this map is interactive, and we try to record all cases on that map, and we have collected information about 1,000 cases. But still, this information is not complete, because we collect information from open sources and mass media, but not all cases are reported due to a range of reasons. But even with this information, we can see how extensive the impact on the environment in Ukraine is. I will continue without these slides. When it comes to the external impact on the environment, in particular on the water, we can speak about three types of such impact: physical, chemical, and mechanical. When it comes to physical or mechanical, we mean infrastructural damage. When it comes to chemical impact, we mean the contamination which migrates from one component to another. And water is one of the elements that can transport such contamination. When it comes to the war impact on water resources in Ukraine, here we can speak about the impact on the water infrastructure in Ukraine and also the impact on water as environmental element. When it comes to the impact of war on water infrastructure in Ukraine, we can state the following. There are the losses that Ukraine has been suffering because of the missile strikes and military activities. Here we speak about the damage of pipelines, drills, wells, pumps, and the whole network of water supply and sewage network. The assessment was conducted by the World Bank, and they also say that this assessment is also incomplete because the assessment was conducted on the territories which are under control of Ukraine. This study covered only the first 6 months of the war, and we can say that the longer the war is, the bigger our losses are. And this means that we will need more resources to recover. Coming back to the assessment of the World Bank of the waters in Ukraine, they say that when it comes to all the facilities, the losses amount to around $7 billion. But that was as of autumn last year when the report was published. They also calculated the recovery budget, which amounts to $5.5 billion. But these numbers are preliminary. This information is still incomplete. And we also should take into consideration that that assessment was made in the past. And we can say that now the numbers have already increased. But still, those numbers are impressive. The war affects water also as the natural resource, natural element. Here we speak about chemical contamination of waters. And it is more difficult to have material assessment of the damage to the environment. It is a difficult task to assess the impact on the environment in general and on the water in particular. Why is it so? Firstly, very often it is unknown what was the water quality and what was the chemical compound of waters in certain area before the impact occurred. That's why it is difficult to compare the quality of the water with the situation in the past. So this is a significant gap. And the assessment of the World Bank was criticized because there was no opportunity to assess losses and possible reparations for the cost damaged. That was due to the fact that there were no original data. That's why we cannot make a benchmark assessment. And of course, under current condition, it is challenging to make such an assessment. Because here we should speak about safety of people who collect samples for the lab analysis. A lot of labs were damaged because of the war in Ukraine. And as for human and technical capacity, it is not on the proper level to conduct the tests needed. Because especially when it comes to studying the impact of hostilities on the water resources, we speak about specific chemical contamination. You cannot assess with the standard water testing. We should need what elements shall be scrutinized. So here we speak about contamination with heavy metals, oil products, other toxic materials and elements. Not all labs, even before the full-scale invasion, were able to conduct such tests in Ukraine. And of course, the war has not improved the situation in terms of the lab capacities in Ukraine. But we should conduct assessment and studies because now we see the importance of original data and the importance of understanding the chemical compound of water and the impact of other components that will interact and will also affect the chemical structure of the water. Without this information, we won't be able to assess the needs for the recovery in the future, and we will not be able to assess the financial needs in particular. As for the next steps that we should start planning right away, they include the development of monitoring system in Ukraine, the environmental monitoring in Ukraine, as well as monitoring of separate elements. Because when it comes to the water monitoring, it shall be accompanied with the monitoring of soils. For the systematic and regular monitoring, we need to have labs with the proper capacities as for with regard to the equipment and human resources. We need to have specialists with the proper qualification in proper numbers to develop such monitoring network to conduct proper testing. This will help us to have, so to say, diagnosis, to understand what areas have been mostly damaged and where we should send resources for the recovery first. The recovery and rebuilding shall envisage activities related not only to the reconstruction of our infrastructure, which is also very important, but we also should envisage the budget for the environmental friendly solutions that will allow us to decrease the contamination and the renew ecosystems that will help us to have environmentally friendly services, because fresh water is kind of a service provided by the nature to us. And we can also improve the quality of such services, natural services, with the environmentally friendly solutions. My colleagues have already started the soil contamination in a range of communities. They were able to establish the areas that had been mostly affected and damaged by the hostilities. So we will have to conserve these areas for this territory to recover through natural ways. And this is an example of environmentally friendly solution that can be economically grounded and could produce long-term results for local communities and the population of Ukraine in general. That's it. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you, Anna. I have the following question. What are the prospects of recovery of the water resources of Ukraine? Will it take a decade or 15 years? This is a very good question. When it comes to the infrastructure, with proper funding, it is possible. But when it comes to chemical contamination, as I've already mentioned, we should develop the monitoring system to be able to trace the migration of chemicals. especially when it comes to groundwaters, because soil is a kind of a barrier that protects groundwater from surface contamination. Here we should pay attention to geological peculiarities of individual areas, because the soils serve as a natural barrier protecting groundwaters from surface contamination. But the existence of such a barrier doesn't mean that groundwaters cannot be contaminated. In summer and in autumn, we tried to analyze the situation in several communities to assess the quality of water in deep wells. We did not identify any impact, and on the one hand, this is good news. This means that the deep horizons are protected. But we need to keep this on control. We need to study different levels, different layers, to understand what is the speed of the migration of dangerous chemicals. This is a long-term work or job, and this is not even for 1 decade. And I think that this problem will remain with us for the next generation. And this shall be a part of our sustainable work to monitor the situation of the environment. My colleagues have some questions to you. Good afternoon. My name is Anatoly Kosin. I'm representing Media Center Ukraine, Odessa. I have the following question to you, if you know the answer. What is the impact of the hostilities on fish, on water fauna? Thank you. This question is related to surface waters and the water area of our seas, because there were a lot of information about impact on the living creatures in the Black Sea, and there were a lot of reports about the damage to dolphins. And because water area of the Black Sea is directly affected by the war, and the contamination of groundwaters sooner or later will lead to contamination of the Black Sea. But I doubt that there are now clear calculations about the impact on fish and other living creatures in water basins of Ukraine. Unfortunately, I don't have such information now, but this is a fact that there is the impact, and we should study it. I have one more question, kind of a clarification. You've mentioned that with the proper funding, it is possible to ensure recovery of Ukrainian water infrastructure during upcoming decade. What is your assessment of the situation? Of course, we should first understand how much time does this war take, because the longer the war is, the more funds we will need. So I already mentioned the numbers published in autumn last year, and I can also add that now the preliminary assessment amounts to 6 billion, which we will need for the recovery of water infrastructure. But these numbers are already outdated. So the longer the war is, the more expensive it will be. So the time factor is very important here. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for finding time to be with us here. That was Anna Danylyak, expert in the development of sustainable agriculture of the NGO Ekodiya, Ecoaction. And the next briefing will take place at 1 p.m. Stay tuned.